Hey, what's up everybody? It's Mike here from The Art of Guitar, here with another artist series. I'm really excited about this one. We got Tony Iommi today. When I was growing up, I couldn't help but hear Black Sabbath and just kind of get scared. I remember the beginning of the song Black Sabbath, hearing the thunderstorm and all that, and then the crazy, dissonant sounds on the riffs, and I was just too young to comprehend it, and I'd always had this kind of scary allure to it, if you will, for me. Anyways, I was driving here to record this, and it started to thunderstorm out, so I figured it was a good sign that I should be doing this one. So, okay, enjoy the techniques of Tony Iommi. Let's get right to it. One time I read an interview with Tony, and he said, one time I saw a band try to cover our songs, and it just didn't sound right. And he realized that it was because they were playing a lot of the power chords on the wrong strings. And if you try to play a song like Iron Man, for example, and that sounds really great. I mean, I learned it the first time from the tribute book, so that's how I learned to play it on the 5th string, 2nd fret starting position. But when I read that article, I realized that Black Sabbath, or Tony Iommi, plays it here on the 6th string, 7th fret. And I did a video not too long ago about the James Hetfield way of playing Enter Sandman, and a lot of people said, why do it exactly the way the artist does it when you could just do it your own way if it's the same notes? Well, this is a good example of when that does matter, because the thickness of the strings when you play it on the 7th fret, 6th string instead is a lot different than when it's back here. Listen to the difference. Once again, I'll play it down here. Now compare that to the Tony Iommi version. Once again, versus. See how it's got a different color to it? It's a little bit darker sounding. It just has a little bit more of a fat sound to it. So it does matter sometimes where you play things on the guitar. Speaking of the song Black Sabbath, it was known as the evil sounding song to me. It's because they use what's called a tritone. And if you ever play the riff to that, just the main idea of it is going to be this sound. Now there's just something really wicked about that last note that I hit. The first two notes are an octave, that's G to G, so they're going to sound good together. Even if you played them at the same time. But the second you add this tritone to it, listen to this sound. So the tritone interval is really just this note and this note. So played together, this is the tritone. People get confused why it's called a tritone, because it's really only 2 notes. But it's because you're starting on G, and if you go up 3 whole steps, so 3 tones, 1, 2, 3, you end up at this note. The D flat, which is the same as this note, so you get that sound. Others will call it a flat 5 interval, an augmented 4th interval, depending on the situation, okay? Now let's sort of piggyback off that concept of the verse part in Black Sabbath. You notice how much space there is. That's a lot of space for a metal song. Something that seems to be lacking today is the concept of leaving space. What I like about leaving space, especially in the Black Sabbath realm, is that it creates an even heavier sound when things do come in. And that's what I really love about it. Take War Pigs, for example. This part, tons of space. Right? There's a hi-hat going during that entire part. And then again, and then just dead space. When it kicks in finally, suddenly it hits you in a different way than if they were just playing a bunch of notes the whole time, filling up the space. So don't be afraid of space. Another good example of that is Heaven and Hell. During the first verse, there's no guitar at all. It's just the bass going do, 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 do. And then when they come in with the chords, it's really cool. So don't forget that aspect of guitar. Sometimes space is more important than actually playing things. Now, if you're going to play Tony Iommi licks, one thing you have to get really good at is the minor pentatonic scale. I'm sure many of you guys have seen me teach this scale many times. If you haven't, it's in a whole bunch of other videos. I'll just go through the actual scale really quick, but I won't be teaching it. These videos really aren't for teaching details. It's about showing you techniques, but you can always jump to our main website for the details, okay? All right, here's the scale. E minor pentatonic is what we're going to use right now. one of Tony's most used scales. Okay, now what he's really good at doing is using hammer-ons and pull-offs to run around that scale. And what I love about minor pentatonic is it's real boxy, so that once you have a couple shapes, you could really go crazy in it. So for example, if you were just to do this hammer-on pull-off exercise, I guess we'll call it an exercise, and just do a walk down, it's a good way to get you started in a lot of his licks. So you can go something like this. Of course, Tony liked to use his ring finger a lot, so he'd probably go like this instead. It's kind of harder for me to do that. He would surprise you sometimes though and use his pinky all of a sudden, so he wasn't opposed to using his pinky. And he uses his ring finger a lot for a guy who cut off the tips of 2 of his fingers. It was his last day at his machine shop job, I guess, and last hour of work, sliced off the tips of his fingers. So he actually got little replacement pieces for the ends of his fingers. I think it was rubber at first and then leather, something like that. I did a little reading on it, but it's pretty interesting. It's pretty metal that he was still able to play guitar. So let's do that walk down. A little faster. Now, if you want to go one step beyond that one, you could double up, because what I noticed Tony liked to do is he liked to double up and do a double hammer-on pull-off per string sometimes, and it makes it a little more interesting. So instead of going like this, now we're going to go like this. Does that sound a little bit more like him? There's a cool little trick that a lot of really great guitar players who play pentatonic like to do. Slash does this a lot. It's where you're playing that minor pentatonic scale, and if you know your shapes, and you can move around the neck a little bit, this will be helpful. So I'm going to play around here, but I'm also going to move to the next shape, which is this. And really I'm going to be focusing on the higher side of that for this exercise, okay? So let's just take the high 3 strings, for example. And then remember, you can come up. That's a great little shape to play within because you get a lot of cool notes and you're in 2 different positions. So you can stretch a little bit and have some good licks come out of that. Now, what really great guitar players seem to do is they try to push the barrier just a little bit. So instead of going right from this 12th fret to the 15th fret, which in this case is going to be E, your root note, to the minor 3rd, G, we're going to add the second interval. We're going to add the F sharp. And this is something that he does in Heaven and Hell in a really cool way. I'll do it really slow at first so you can hear the actual context. Without that second interval, that lick wouldn't have sounded that cool, in my opinion. It's great to play around pentatonic, but adding that second seems to give you a little bit of that real evil sound. So whether it's this, it just adds a different color that you can play with. It's fun. So let's do that lick again a little bit faster so you can hear it. So you try utilizing that second interval and see if it really helps evolve your pentatonic scales a little bit. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Iron Man, one of my favorite songs by Black Sabbath. And even though it's been played to death, it's in movies now, it's in commercials, everything, I never get tired of it because if you go back to the raw quality of that kick drum in the beginning, and then those behind the nut bends are so cool. So I always wondered how he did that because I had noticed on his guitar he didn't have a whammy bar. So over time, I was able to learn that it's the behind the nut bend. And this is fun. All you have to do is hit your open E string, reach behind the nut. By the way, this is the nut of the guitar for anybody who doesn't know that. If you reach behind, you could still push the string, and if you have enough space between the string and the headstock, you can do this move. If you have a locking system going on and there's locks that are locked, you can't do this. It's not going to work. So make sure you have the ability to do this first before you push on the string in vain and just hurt your finger, okay? I'll do it sort of from a side view so you can see how I'm bending. There is a really cool riff, a single note riff that I love to play. It just feels good to play. And by the way, just because you play something and it feels good doesn't mean it always sounds good. That's something I had to learn the hard way. But this is one of those cases where both are true, okay? It feels good and it sounds good. Here's what it is. Now, the important thing about this riff that a lot of people miss is when you hit this D note, which is the 5th string, 5th fret, you can't just hit it flat. When I say flat, what I mean is you just hit it normal and then finish off. It's just not going to sound the same. What you have to do is give it a quarter of a bend. Now, you don't do it right away. People make that mistake as well. You don't know how many times I've heard that. It just sounds weird, so really listen when you do things, okay? What you do is you hit the note flat first, or straight on I'll call it, and then give it a tiny bit of a quarter bend before you move to the next. It's kind of like you're bending and then falling to the next note. See the difference? Sound familiar? One thing I noticed when I was reading off the tab book was a lot of the times when he would hit a note, there'd be a vibrato bar that just went crazy and went for a long period of time. That's because Tony had some amazing vibrato, and I think a lot of that had to do with him using lighter strings. I read somewhere that he would use 8-gauge strings on his guitar. I think it was because of his fingertips being very sensitive because of what happened. So when he would push the string, it would hurt his fingers a little bit, so he got really light strings. And if you ever tune really far down or you use really light strings or both, you'll notice that the string is very sensitive. And all you have to do to get a cool vibrato is barely move it. I have regular gauge strings on here. Actually, these are 10s. But I'm going to kind of exaggerate my motion just to get you started on the idea. So let's say you hit a note and you want to get more out of it. That's what I think a vibrato is. Instead of just hitting a flat, straight note, you're getting more out of it. You're kind of shaking life out of it, if you will. So let's hit a note and just start shaking it a little bit, all right? Now, vibrato is one of those things that's hard to do slow. So if I try to show you in detail really slow, it kind of feels funny because I have to get it going and then it feels like it takes off by itself. But a good way to improve your vibrato, by the way, I'm always working on my own to improve it. Think of the string having just to ride the fret rail. So the string has to touch the fret. Look at my ring finger right here. And then it's touching the fret and you're just riding the rail smoothly up and down or from the middle pulling down this way. Depends on what note I'm playing, what string I'm on. There's a lot of factors. We do a whole vibrato lesson on the website. But for right now, just take a note and ride the rail up and down. Don't try to go up to the middle and then down and then back to the middle. That's not going to result in a very good vibrato. Pick one direction and just go with it. What I like to do is think of it as a bend as well, like you're bending up and down, and then just speeding up until it kind of takes off on its own. Here's an example. So that's kind of a frantic vibrato, but that's what I hear Tony doing a lot, especially on the low notes. It's funny, it's so crazy it almost sounds like a trill, which we're going to do in a little bit. Of course, you got to teach something off Paranoid, right? So once again, learning off the tribute book, I learned Paranoid Randy Rhoads' way and not Tony's way. So when I finally learned Tony's way, I realized it was a lot heavier sounding because he plays it here instead of back here. So once again, Randy Rhoads. Sounds cool. Actually, I think Randy went like this. But Tony would be here, 12th fret, 6th string. It's the same note, still E, but different. Hear the difference? Randy. Tony. A little thicker sounding. Which leads us to our next technique, which a lot of these piggyback off each other, I hope you noticed. You'll notice when you play War Pigs, if you play Paranoid, Tony loved to do this slide, and it always seemed to end up at the 12th fret, which is great. So for this one, we're going to go to the 2nd string, the 3rd string, and the 4th string, all at the 12th fret. We're just going to bar across. And we're either going to just hit it, or we're going to slide after we hit it. We're Remember, when you slide, you can't just lift the pressure up and bring your hand back. It dies. You have to keep the pressure for a little while as you slide across those frets. Now that might feel a little bit like torture on your finger because it's raking against those frets, but you'll get used to it. You gotta toughen up a little bit for Black Sabbath, right? So whether it's see how you can slide it, or you can leave it where it is. You can also just play a single 12th fret if you want to. In this example. I just give it some vibrato, and I slid, so I added a few things to it, but nonetheless, it's like a fill using the 12th fret. All right, you guys might as well dedicate a whole day to trills if you're gonna try to play Tony's licks. A big part of his playing is just trilling like crazy. Now, whether it's the Black Sabbath riff like we did earlier, or countless solos that he just trills on, you really want to develop the ability to trill. Another thing now that you could do, if you feel like you're very weak doing the 1-2 combination, you can always bring the third finger in and do that. So it's okay to substitute a finger once in a while. If you feel like you can't quite, if it doesn't feel right with a certain combination, try it with another finger. I learned that the hard way from the Enter Sandman riff, that you can do that. So if I were to trill the Black Sabbath riff with my ring finger now, I feel a lot stronger. Now don't just do trills down there. Go ahead and bring it up. Try it maybe in your pentatonic scales that we did earlier. Try to do some pinky trills. Sometimes you forget about the power of repetition, and if you come up with a really cool riff, go ahead and play it a bunch of times. Drive that home, because it's really hard if, let's say for example, if you're trying to write some leads, it's hard to keep endlessly coming up with cool things. Plus, if you throw like 100 cool things at somebody, they're only going to remember a few of them, right? So you might as well do one great thing a bunch of times instead, and especially when you're playing Black Sabbath type riffs and licks. So this riff, for example, it's a great riff, followed by then there's a solo, and they come right back to you should go through Iron Man and count how many times they do each riff. You'd be surprised. On the website, we love to practice sequences, and one of my favorite is going backwards in thirds. I did this a lot for the Megadeth lesson video, and that's where you take any scale you want and just go backwards in thirds. Let's take a pretty straightforward scale. Let's do the major scale. Now, like I said, I'm not here to teach you the scale. We take it really slow on the website to show you every step, but I just want to show you the sound of going backwards in thirds using that scale. That already sounds cool. It's a great way to take something that's sort of simple and making it even better just by doing a sequence. So in this example, if you take that and throw it into a riff, you get something like this sometimes. I love how you're descending in a certain pattern. It just makes it sound really great. So what I had to do for that last technique was tune down. Now, Black Sabbath isn't kidding around. They do a lot of stuff in standard tuning, but when they tune down, they go down 1.5 steps. So this is why I really urge you guys to learn your theory, learn your notes, learn the names of your strings, learn how far down 1.5 steps is and how that affects the actual tone. If you don't know anything about music theory, you're kind of at the slave of having to memorize a lot of things and look things up, like what's a whole 1.5 steps down from E, and you get confused. Now that we're tuned down, we have a whole bunch of new examples we can do. If you want to really get a cool feeling, it's almost like a marching kind of feeling, I guess you want to call it. Start to play in triplets. Write a few riffs in the triplet feel. Now, if you think of triplets, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, it's got like a bounce to it. So one of my favorite riffs by Sabbath is this. So let's just do that bouncing triplet riff on one string. Now, these are triplets, they're really fast. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2. You're not hitting every single triplet, by the way, that would sound like this. That's a cool sound too. You're just playing parts of those triplets, but you end up with this really cool groove to it. Dun 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 triplet dun 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 dun. So the triplets are in there. So if you want to have a lot of fun, try to write some things in triplet feel, and you might surprise yourself how cool some of these riffs can sound if you just convert them over to triplets. So let's say you have a riff that's just a basic set of power chords. Add the triplet feel and you get a different sound. It's a really cool tool for riff writers to use. We've done these in other videos, but two-step bends can be kind of a chore at first because you might already have trouble with just whole step bends. Whole step bends equal 2 frets, so pretend we're here at the E minor pentatonic once again. I'm just going to go ahead and go to the 3rd string and 14th fret and bend it up a whole step. Let's let me get used to the feel of right away when you start playing lead guitar, because you're doing whole step bends the most. But if you really want to throw in something cool, go ahead and throw in a 2-step bend. So this note right here, you're going to have to bend it up to the pitch, not of this, but of this. So if you're measuring, the 14th fret bending up typically sounds like the 16th fret. We needed to make it sound like the 18th fret. So go ahead and play just the 18th fret. Now bend the 14th fret till it sounds like that. So listen to the difference. Whole step. Step and a half, 3 frets. 2 steps, 4 frets. So he'd be in the middle of a lick and just throw it in like this. Using pedal tones is a great way to fill up some sound. So if you hear the part in War Pigs where they use a pedal tone, you hear the E note laying underneath all the other notes and it creates this huge wall of sound. It's very interesting. So without it, you get this. But add the open E underneath it and you get a whole different sound. This is a pretty common minor pentatonic lick that we've done in a lot of other videos, but not really to this extent, I would say. So if you were to take the highest part of the minor pentatonic, 14, 12, 12, let's say, if we're just using fret tones, fret numbers, I should say, and we're going to bend the 14th fret up a whole step, and then just lay our first finger across. I call it the Chuck Berry trick. Sort of that idea. But we're going to break it up into single notes. So we're going to bend the first note really quick, actually. Then we're going to play the next fret, or the next string, 12th fret, and the next string, 12th fret, back to back. Now, because this is so fast, what I like to do is just use sweep picking, and I like to go downstroke, down, down, like that with my pick. Now the trick to getting it to sound more like Tony is to keep doing it. So let's go slow first and slowly bring it up. A lot of people ask, should I be rolling my finger to get individual tones? Typically, yes. Like that. But because we're going so fast, the sound of the 2 notes, the 2 12th frets ringing out, isn't the end of the world. Actually kind of adds to the sound. I like that. Versus trying to go make it perfectly independent. So I've seen this done a couple ways. All downstrokes like I just did. Also, upstroke, down, down. Upstroke, down, down. That's only tough sometimes for me because you just did 2 downstrokes, and now you have to come up with an upstroke, so it's a little weird feeling. If you do 3 downstrokes, it feels like it's kind of nice and uniform, But sometimes that upstroke is a little bit quicker than having to do a downstroke like that. So try it a couple different ways and see what works for you. Versus when he would do a solo back then, he would just layer it with another solo and sometimes another solo. So you're trying to figure out a Black Sabbath solo, and all of a sudden you hear two other guitars playing, and it just creates this huge mess for you. But it adds to the sound, once again, the big wall of sound. So using the magic of post-production, which I like to do in other videos too, it's fun, I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of soloing, and then I'm going to layer on top of it just to show you how cool it can sound if you just play random pentatonic runs and blend them all together, okay? 3, 4... Chaotic, but very interesting sounding. A sound that was specifically heavy when I heard them live was when they did War Pigs. And I remember the end, they were doing that riff. I was wondering how they made something so heavy be so melodic at the same time. Well, what they're doing is they're doing a power chord, but they're adding a flatted seventh to it. And if you guys know your intervals, a flatted 7, if you took the major scale from E, that's the normal 7, D sharp. But if you take the flatted 7th, the D, and you add that to the root note, you get this sound. I like that sound. Now, that's how you create a dominant 7 chord, kind of. And we explain a lot of that on the website, how to build chords and make these intervals work for you. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're just going to do a power chord. And we're going to add the flat 7 to it. So that's going to be, talking fret-wise, the 12th fret on the 6th string, the 14th fret on the 5th string, and then the 12th fret on the 4th string. You get this. So we're going to call that a 7, no third chord. That's going to be the technique for this. My friend and I were sitting on the couch once before a show. We were going to play War Pigs possibly that night. And we couldn't really figure out how Tony was doing this one lick in War Pigs. And we came to the consensus that it was a bend followed by a little bit of a trill to a bend right away. And I did a little more research on it and I realized that it's actually a slide. So here's what we thought it was. And that still works. When two guitar players are doing that at the same time, it sounds pretty legit. When I watched Tony doing it on a couple live videos, he would slide and then do some trills, slide, trill, slide, trill. So a good way to practice this, I found, is to go like this. Slide. And then I let that come back. And as I come back with that ring finger, I pull off. And then I hammer back on. Slide. Slide back. Pull off. Hammer. Remember, when you pull off, you actually pluck the string. Don't just lift off. That's a big mistake people make. All right, everybody, I hope you learned a lot about heavy guitar from this Tony IOMMI video. I know I always learn a lot whenever I do these videos, so I really like doing them for you guys. I have to do a lot of research, and it helps me become a better guitar player as well. And so I know I'm going to implement some of these into my riffs and playing. That's another big aspect of this video, is to get these techniques out there so that you guys can take them and run with them and do what you want with them. Make them your own, okay? All right, guys, we'll see you at another lesson very soon. Thank you.